Hey everyone in Patreon land, great to chat with you here again. Manny here from SFCC with another video for Collingwood Cymbals. And today we're going to talk about some different methods for aging cymbals and whether they can be an appropriate substitute for actual age. So to start off, when we talk about cymbal aging, what does that actually mean for the structure of the metal and the way it moves and all that stuff? The secret ingredient to this whole process, as far as I understand it, is something called dislocation. So dislocations are impurities and deformations of the lattice structure in an alloy that are caused by stressors to the metal. A stressor such as cold working, aka hammering. So the more a cymbal is hammered, the more dislocations you get in the metal, which allows it to be more ductile. And the ductility is what allows the cymbal to be played without shattering, more or less. Gives it the flexibility that it needs to project sonically. The next step is where the actual quality of the aging comes in. More dislocations leads to more opportunities for precipitates to form over time. Precipitates are small, solid metal formations, particle formations that occur naturally as part of the aging process, which can be expedited with heat, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But here's the important part. When the precipitates form, they have to have somewhere to go. A metal alloy with an undisturbed lattice pattern doesn't really have many places for them to settle in. But a piece with a lot of dislocations, aka a hand-hammered cymbal, is exactly what they need. So the precipitates settle into the dislocations and block their movement. Given that the dislocations moving and creating space within the lattice pattern is what allows the metal to stretch and be less brittle, the more precipitates that form and block those dislocations are what causes the metal to be less ductile and to become more hard and more brittle. And that's the basic version of the secret of how age dries up a cymbal and makes the stick sound more prominent, while also making it more prone to cracking. There are definitely more moving parts than that. It's a lot more complicated, but that's the basis of how I've understood it. Now that we have that out of the way, the million-dollar question is it possible to replicate this process effectively and bypass the natural aging process? So let's go over a few options and see what we find. The first and I think most common option that most people know about are patinas. They're fun, easy to work with, and they can be pretty visually unpredictable, which is part of what makes them fun to work with. They can be a big surprise when you pull them out and have that wow factor. And they do work to a certain extent. Patinas do cause precipitation in the metal and restrict the vibration in other ways. But the issue with it is that all of that stuff is only happening on the surface of the cymbal. Depending on how thick your patina is, it does produce some of the elements of aging, but it's in a more low resolution way than actual time does, which forms precipitates all the way through the entire body of the cymbal. Also, if you overdo a patina, if you're using harsh acids and stuff and they really kind of dig in and form a thick layer on the surface, it's really easy to get a cymbal that sounds unnaturally dry and tinny rather than the smooth and resonant dryness that comes over time. So in short, patinas do work to an extent, and I like them because of all the options you have to work with, but it's obviously not a perfect solution. The next one is a fan favorite of a lot of more old school drummers, and that is intentional cracking through home hammering or other methods. This one I obviously have mixed feelings about. As a cymbal maker, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit to see people intentionally cracking their cymbals to get the sound that they want. But if it's the sound that you want and the cymbal's yours, you paid for it, it's yours, who am I to really say anything about it? In terms of replicating aging though, I really wouldn't recommend it. It's a super drastic method, and it's often detrimental to the sound and the balance of tones in the spread of the entire cymbal. Not to mention that when you crack a cymbal, all it wants to do is just keep cracking at those same points. So if you do that, you end up with a limited time with the cymbal that you like, right after you do that. And you probably won't experience the joy of a natural aging sound because of the drastic measure that you took to achieve that sound. So, does it restrict vibration and give you a drier sound? Yes. Would I recommend it? No. The next one is heat, which I think is probably the most contended one on the list. I personally never work with heat, so I may not be the right person to talk about this specific entry in the list. It might be a topic for the comments. If some of you guys have dealt with heat before and you have a little bit more insight, please let me know. But the thing with metals, all kinds of metals, is that they're extremely temperamental when it comes to adding heat. Just a few degrees too much and you can ruin the flexibility and cause a lot of stress to the metal. I have heard about people putting their cymbals in the oven at very low temperatures to push along the precipitation process a little bit. If we're talking about like 180 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, it's probably not going to be a huge problem, but I would still be wary of that process personally. When we're talking about the actual effect on the metal, heat is the main way that precipitation hardening or age hardening is done in metal factories that do that kind of thing. So in terms of actually aging the metal, heat is probably the way that will work best throughout the entire body and the molecular structure of the cymbal. But if someone is considering trying this, I'd recommend doing a lot of research and being very careful, because like I said, it can go wrong very easily when you're adding heat. Funny story, actually, when I was first modifying these cheap little brass cymbals that I would get for free, I was having a backyard fire, just kind of hanging out and looking at the work that I had just done, and something came over me, and I threw the cymbal in the fire just to see what would happen. And I watched as the cymbal turned dark brown and all the resonance was killed, and I just ended up throwing it away. So my experience with heat is just me being kind of dumb, but I'm sure you're going to do a better job when you go about doing it your way if you choose to do that. So be very careful, maybe avoid blow torches to the start until you understand a little bit more about how it's going to happen. Start slow, start easy, and if you try it, let me know what happens. And this last method is one of my favorites. It's a very subtle method. It's just a brilliant idea from Dave that I've used as well on a couple of recent cymbals, and that's the idea of, I think he called it overlathing. Lots of old cymbals have a nice deep pin lathe as kind of the finishing touch, and over time as the cymbal's being played and transported, the surface wears down a little bit and smooths out those sharp lathe lines. So what Dave did is emulate that aspect of the aging process specifically by doing the pin lathe and then lightly lathing over top to take away that sharp edge kind of artificially. And you get the bright shimmer of the pin lathe, but it's just relaxed down a little bit, which is super cool, and I think it should give us some inspiration to think outside the box when we think about aging methods. It's just a brilliant idea, so hat tip to Dave for that one. So in conclusion, I would say that any of these methods can really point your sound in the right direction, but the fact of the matter is that all of these aspects, whether it's age hardening, patina, smoothing, etc., all of those methods working together in perfect balance over time is something that just can't be replicated, unfortunately. The analogy that I like to think about when thinking about new cymbals versus vintage cymbals is kind of like the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge can be acquired at any time throughout our own actions and focuses, but wisdom is something that comes from a full life lived through the knowledge that we naturally attain over time. So in my mind, new cymbals have knowledge, old cymbals have wisdom. I don't know if that really makes any sense, but I think it can be kind of a cool analogy if you have a weird brain like I do. But that's all for today, so thanks for listening. Have a go in the comments and see what we all think and share your experiments and all that stuff. Maybe you have a history with trying a lot of these things, so talk to each other and educate me a little bit, and let's see how it goes. So, Happy New Year and happy shedding.